The summer heat in London was unbearable that Tuesday afternoon. Tourists crowded around Buckingham Palace, phones out, cameras clicking, everyone hoping to catch the perfect shot of the famous royal guards. Among them stood Jake Morrison, a 28-year-old software developer from Texas, wearing his typical American tourist uniform of cargo shorts, a loud Hawaiian shirt, and a baseball cap turned backward. Jake had been traveling through Europe for 3 weeks, documenting every moment for his social media followers back home. He loved getting reactions, loved being the center of attention. His TikTok account had grown to nearly 50,000 followers, and he knew exactly what content would get him more views and likes. As he approached the guard post, Jake noticed the stoic figure standing perfectly still in the iconic red uniform and tall black hat. The guard's face showed no emotion. His eyes stared straight ahead and his rifle remained positioned exactly as protocol demanded. To Jake, this was comedy gold waiting to happen. "This is going to be hilarious," Jake whispered to his phone camera as he started recording. "Watch me mess with this robot soldier." He began his performance making funny faces just inches from the guard's face, waving his hands dramatically, and speaking in an exaggerated British accent. "Oh look, it's a statue that breathes," he announced loudly, causing other tourists to gather around and watch the spectacle. The guard remained motionless, his training evident in every fiber of his being. Years of discipline had taught him to ignore distractions to maintain his position regardless of what happened around him. But Jake interpreted this stillness as weakness, as someone who couldn't fight back. "Come on, robot man, show me some emotion," Jake taunted, getting closer. He started making airplane noises while running around the guard in circles, his phone capturing every moment. The crowd of onlookers grew larger, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable with the display. Jake's confidence grew with each laugh from the audience. He had found his viral moment and he wasn't going to waste it. He began imitating the guard stance, marching back and forth in an exaggerated military style while making jokes about British people and their silly traditions. The guard's name was Thomas Mitchell, though none of the tourists knew this. At 24 years old, he had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 2 years. Behind his stoic expression, Thomas remained focused on his duty, even as Jake's mockery continued. He had dealt with disrespectful tourists before, but something about Jake's behavior felt particularly cruel. As Jake's performance reached its peak, he decided to take things further. He pulled out a small mirror from his backpack and began reflecting sunlight toward the guard's face, hoping to make him blink or react. The crowd watched as the light danced across Thomas's features, but still, the young soldier didn't move. "This guy is literally a machine," Jake announced to his camera. "I bet he doesn't even have feelings. These guards are just for show, totally useless. What's the point of having soldiers who can't even react to anything?" The other tourists began to murmur among themselves. Some found Jake's antics entertaining, but others started to feel uncomfortable. A few elderly British visitors shook their heads disapprovingly, but no one stepped forward to intervene. Jake, encouraged by the attention, decided to escalate further. He began telling jokes about British military history, making fun of their accents and questioning why anyone would want to stand still all day playing dress-up. His voice grew louder, his gestures more dramatic. Unknown to Jake and the crowd, Thomas had recently returned from a difficult deployment. The young guard carried invisible wounds that no one could see. His rigid training and discipline were not just about ceremony, they were about survival, about maintaining control when everything inside wanted to break down. As Jake continued his mockery, taking selfies with the unmoving guard and making increasingly crude jokes, he had no idea that his actions were being observed by someone who would soon reveal a truth that would change everything. In the crowd, partially hidden behind other tourists, stood an older man in civilian clothes, watching the entire scene unfold with growing concern and anger. The man's weathered hands clenched into fists as he witnessed Jake's disrespectful behavior. He had seen enough young soldiers struggle, had known too many who had sacrificed everything for their service. This public humiliation of a guardsman was more than he could tolerate in silence. Jake, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him, continued his performance, believing he had found the perfect content for his social media empire. Jake's antics had been going on for nearly 20 minutes when he decided to attempt his most outrageous stunt yet. He approached Thomas from behind and began making shadow puppets against the guard's red uniform, narrating an imaginary story about the statue soldier who forgot how to be human. The crowd had grown significantly, with people pointing and recording the scene on their own phones. Jake felt like a street performer who had struck gold. His follower count was already climbing as people shared his live stream across multiple platforms. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake announced dramatically, "I present to you the amazing disappearing personality trick. Watch as this man has completely erased his humanity for a fancy costume." He gestured grandly toward Thomas, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that he was even aware of what was happening. Among the spectators, the older man in civilian clothes had moved closer. His name was Colonel Robert Hartley, recently retired after 35 years of military service. At 58, he had seen combat in 3 different countries and had commanded soldiers like Thomas in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Colonel Hartley's trained eye noticed things that the casual observers missed. He saw the slight tension in Thomas's shoulders, the barely controlled breathing, the way his grip on his rifle had subtly shifted. The young guard wasn't an emotionless robot as Jake claimed. He was a professional soldier maintaining discipline under extremely difficult circumstances. Jake, oblivious to the growing tension around him, decided to share his expert analysis with his audience. "You see, folks, these guards are basically living mannequins. They probably don't even have real military training. It's all just pageantry for tourists like us. They're not real soldiers." This statement proved to be the breaking point for several people in the crowd. A few British tourists began shaking their heads more vigorously, and some started walking away in disgust. But Colonel Hartley stepped forward, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. "Excuse me, young man," the colonel said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "I think you've had your fun. Perhaps it's time to move along." Jake spun around, annoyed at being interrupted during his viral moment. "Hey, buddy, this is a public space. I'm not breaking any laws here. Just having some harmless fun with the statue man." Colonel Hartley studied Jake carefully, noting the entitled attitude, the complete lack of respect, the way he dismissed any criticism. "Harmless fun?" the older man repeated. "Do you have any idea what this young man has been through?" "What do you mean?" Jake scoffed. "He's just standing there doing nothing. How hard can that be?" The crowd began to quiet down, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Colonel Hartley moved closer to Jake, close enough that his next words were clearly audible to everyone present. "This young man is a member of one of the most elite military units in the world. The Queen's Guard isn't just ceremonial. These soldiers are combat-trained professionals who serve in active-duty deployments between their ceremonial duties." Jake laughed dismissively. "Come on, old man. You're telling me this guy in the funny hat is some kind of super soldier? He can't even react to a little teasing." "That's exactly what makes him extraordinary," Colonel Hartley replied, his voice growing stronger. "The discipline you're mocking represents years of training, mental fortitude, and dedication that most people could never achieve." Thomas remained perfectly still, but those observant enough could see a slight change in his posture. He was listening, and for the first time since Jake's harassment began, something other than stoic endurance flickered across his features. Jake, however, wasn't backing down. His phone was still recording, and he could see his viewer count climbing. This confrontation was turning into even better content than his original plan. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you're ruining my video. Why don't you go find someone else to lecture?" The colonel's expression hardened. "I know exactly who I am. The question is, do you know who you're humiliating?" "Some guy in a costume," Jake replied sarcastically. "A soldier who served 2 tours in Afghanistan," Colonel Hartley said quietly, his words cutting through the summer air like a blade. "A young man who lost 3 members of his unit to an IED explosion 6 months ago. A guardsman who stands at this post not because it's easy, but because maintaining discipline and honor is the only way he knows how to cope with what he's seen." The crowd fell completely silent. Jake's confident smirk began to fade as the weight of these words settled over everyone present. His phone continued recording, but suddenly the content felt different. Heavier. "You don't know what you're talking about," Jake said, but his voice had lost much of its earlier bravado. Colonel Hartley turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying to every person present. "This young soldier has been standing here maintaining perfect discipline while being mocked and humiliated. Not because he can't respond, but because he chooses not to. That's not weakness. That's strength most of us will never possess." The atmosphere around Buckingham Palace had completely shifted. What started as entertainment for curious tourists had become something much more serious. Jake looked around nervously as he realized that the crowd's mood had changed. People were no longer laughing at his jokes or encouraging his behavior. Colonel Hartley wasn't finished. He had spent too many years watching good soldiers suffer in silence to let this moment pass without speaking the truth. "Would you like to know what real courage looks like?" he asked Jake, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Jake's phone was still recording, but his hands had begun to shake slightly. The viral moment he had been creating was turning into something he hadn't expected. "I was just making jokes," he said defensively. "Jokes," the colonel repeated. "You were making jokes about a soldier who watched his best friend die in his arms. You were mocking someone who spent weeks in a military hospital recovering from injuries sustained while serving his country." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the gravity in the older man's voice. Thomas remained at his post, but those nearest to him could see that his breathing had become more controlled, more deliberate. The professional mask he wore was requiring more effort to maintain. "How do you know all this?" Jake demanded, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Colonel Hartley straightened his shoulders, and despite wearing civilian clothes, his military bearing became unmistakable. "Because I was his commanding officer in Afghanistan. I was there when the convoy was hit. I was there when we pulled him from the wreckage, and I was there when he made the decision to continue serving despite everything he had lost." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Several people lowered their phones, suddenly feeling that recording this moment would be an intrusion rather than entertainment. Jake's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Guardsman Mitchell," Colonel Hartley continued using Thomas's formal title, "chose to take this ceremonial posting not because it was easy, but because standing perfectly still for hours at a time was the closest thing to meditation he could find. The discipline you've been mocking is how he processes trauma. The stillness you've been ridiculing is how he finds peace." Thomas's eyes, which had remained fixed straight ahead throughout Jake's entire performance, flickered almost imperceptibly toward his former commanding officer. The breach in protocol was tiny, lasting perhaps half a second, but it spoke volumes about the emotion he was holding inside. Jake felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. His followers online were sending messages, but they were no longer the encouraging comments he was used to receiving. People were calling him cruel, heartless, disrespectful. His viral moment was becoming viral for all the wrong reasons. "I didn't know," Jake whispered, though whether he was speaking to Colonel Hartley, to Thomas, or to his phone camera was unclear. "Of course you didn't know," the colonel replied. "That's the point. You saw a uniform and decided to make entertainment from someone's service. You assumed that because someone was doing their duty quietly, they were fair game for your mockery." An elderly British woman in the crowd stepped forward. Her voice was gentle but firm as she addressed Jake. "Young man, these guards represent something sacred to us. They're not tourist attractions, they're our protectors, our heroes, standing watch over what we hold dear." Jake looked around desperately, seeking some escape from the situation that had spiraled completely out of his control. The phones that had been capturing his comedy routine were now documenting his humiliation. Comments on his live stream were brutal, with viewers expressing outrage at his behavior. "What happened to his unit?" Jake asked quietly, the question seeming to come from somewhere deep inside him that his social media personality had long buried. Colonel Hartley's expression softened slightly. "Lance Corporal Davies was killed instantly. Private Thompson survived, long enough to say goodbye to his wife over satellite phone. Sergeant Williams..." The colonel's voice caught slightly. "Sergeant Williams was going to be a father. The baby was born 3 months after the funeral." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual sounds of London traffic seemed muted. Thomas remained perfectly still, but a single tear tracked down his cheek, visible to those standing close enough to see. Jake stared at that tear, and for the first time since arriving in London, he felt something other than excitement about getting attention. He felt ashamed. The weight of what he had done, of how he had treated someone who had sacrificed so much, hit him like a physical blow. "I need to apologize," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Hartley nodded. "Yes, you do. But more than that, you need to understand what service means, what sacrifice looks like, what real strength is." The crowd waited to see what Jake would do next. His phone continued to stream live, broadcasting his moment of reckoning to thousands of viewers around the world. The viral content he had wanted so badly was spreading faster than he had ever imagined, but the story it told was not the one he had intended to create. Jake stood frozen, staring at the tear on Thomas's face. The moment stretched endlessly as he struggled to find words that could somehow undo the damage he had done. His phone felt heavy in his hand, still broadcasting live to an audience that was growing more hostile by the minute. "Turn off your camera," Colonel Hartley said firmly. "This young man deserves privacy for what comes next." For the first time since arriving in London, Jake immediately obeyed someone else's instruction. He fumbled with his phone, ending the live stream that had captured his public humiliation. The silence that followed felt louder than all his earlier showboating. "Guardsman Mitchell," Colonel Hartley said softly, using the formal address but with unmistakable warmth. "You have permission to speak." Thomas blinked slowly as if emerging from a trance. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Thank you, sir. I'm maintaining my post as ordered." "I know you are, son. You always do." Jake watched this exchange, with growing understanding of how badly he had misread the situation. This wasn't just a tourist attraction or a photo opportunity. This was a young man doing his job while carrying invisible burdens that Jake couldn't begin to imagine. "Guardsman," Jake said, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I'm so incredibly sorry." Thomas's eyes moved slightly, acknowledging Jake's presence for the first time. "Apology accepted, sir." "No," Jake said, stepping closer. "You don't understand. I made fun of you, humiliated you, treated you like you weren't even human. And you've been through things I can't even imagine." The crowd remained silent, witnessing what felt like a sacred moment of recognition between two young men from different worlds. Colonel Hartley watched carefully, ready to intervene if needed, but sensing that something important was happening. "I thought you were just standing there doing nothing," Jake continued. "I thought it was easy, meaningless. I had no idea what standing still really meant for you." Thomas maintained his military bearing, but his voice carried a gentleness that surprised everyone listening. "The discipline helps, sir. Staying focused on duty helps quiet other thoughts." Jake felt tears building in his own eyes. "What other thoughts?" "The sounds," Thomas said simply. "The explosion keeps playing in my head. Davy's calling for his mother. Thompson asking me to tell his wife he loved her. When I focus on standing perfectly still, when I concentrate on my duty, those sounds get quieter." The raw honesty of this confession hit Jake like a physical blow. Several people in the crowd began crying openly. This wasn't the entertainment they had come looking for, but it was something far more important. "How do you do it?" Jake asked. "How do you stand here while people like me, Because this is my service now," Thomas replied. "After Afghanistan, after the hospital, after all the nightmares and therapy sessions, standing guard, here gives me purpose. Every tourist who takes a respectful photo, every child who waves at me, every moment I can serve my country in peace instead of war, that's healing." Colonel Hartley stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder. "And when someone disrespects that service, when they mock what you've sacrificed to be here, it reminds me why the discipline matters," Thomas said. "Why staying strong matters. Why not reacting to provocation is its own form of courage." Jake was openly crying now, understanding flooding through him with devastating clarity. "I turned your healing into my entertainment. I made your service about my social media. I'm the worst kind of person. No, sir, Thomas said firmly. You're not. You made a mistake, but you're learning from it. That's what good people do. The generosity of this response, coming from someone Jake had spent 20 minutes humiliating, was more than he could bear. He sank down onto his knees on the pavement, overwhelmed by shame and a new understanding of what real strength looked like. Get up, Colonel Hartley said gently but firmly. Guardsman Mitchell doesn't need your guilt. He needs your respect and your understanding. Jake struggled to his feet, wiping his eyes. What can I do? How can I make this right? Thomas smiled slightly, the first break in his ceremonial composure that wasn't caused by pain. You can tell people what you learned here today. You can help others understand that the guards aren't tourist attractions. We're soldiers serving our country in a different way. I will, Jake promised. I'll delete all the videos I made making fun of you. I'll tell everyone how wrong I was. Don't delete them, Colonel Hartley said unexpectedly. Use them. Show people the before and after. Show them what you learned. Make your mistake into something that educates instead of entertains. Jake looked at both men, these soldiers who had faced unimaginable hardships and yet showed him kindness he didn't deserve. You're both better men than I am. We're just men who've learned hard lessons, the colonel replied. Now it's your turn to learn and to help others learn too. The crowd around Buckingham Palace had changed completely. What began as casual tourists seeking entertainment had become a gathering of people deeply moved by what they had witnessed. Many were wiping away tears. Others stood in respectful silence, all of them processing the powerful lesson they had just received. Jake pulled out his phone again, but this time with trembling hands and a completely different purpose. Would it be okay if I recorded a new message, one that tells the truth about what happened here? Colonel Hartley looked to Thomas, who gave a small nod of approval. Go ahead, son. But do it right this time. Jake opened his camera app and began recording, but his entire demeanor had transformed. Gone was the cocky showman seeking likes and shares. In his place stood a humbled young man ready to admit his failures publicly. My name is Jake Morrison, he began, his voice thick with emotion. 20 minutes ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I came to Buckingham Palace thinking I was going to create funny content by mocking one of the royal guards. I treated a human being like he was a tourist attraction, like he was there for my entertainment. He paused, looking directly at Thomas, who maintained his post but was clearly listening. What I didn't know, what I was too ignorant and selfish to consider, is that this soldier, Guardsman Mitchell, is a war hero. He served in Afghanistan, lost members of his unit, was wounded in service to his country, and is now serving in a different way. The phone captured every word as Jake continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. I spent 20 minutes making fun of someone whose strength and discipline I could never match. I mocked a man who has sacrificed more for others than I've ever sacrificed for anyone. And he stood there and took it. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to maintain his duty despite my cruelty. Several tourists had begun recording Jake's confession, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The viral moment was happening, but it was completely different from what anyone had expected. I want everyone watching this to understand something, Jake continued. These guards aren't props for your photos. They're not entertainment for your videos. They're soldiers, heroes, people who have served their country in ways most of us never will. They deserve our respect, our gratitude, and our protection from people like the person I was this afternoon. Colonel Hartley watched approvingly as Jake spoke. The young American was learning one of the most important lessons a person could learn, the lesson of recognizing the humanity and sacrifice in others. Guardsman Mitchell, Jake said, turning toward Thomas while still recording. I know I already apologized, but I want everyone to hear this. I'm sorry for treating you with such disrespect. I'm sorry for making your service about my entertainment. And I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express, that you and Colonel Hartley taught me what real strength looks like. Thomas, maintaining his position, spoke quietly but clearly enough for the camera to pick up his words. Thank you, sir. Your apology means more than you know. Jake nodded and turned back to his camera. I'm going to leave the original videos up not because I'm proud of them, but because I want people to see the full story. I want them to see how wrong someone can be and how much you can learn if you're willing to listen. He paused the recording and looked around at the crowd that had gathered. I need to ask all of you something. Will you help me share the real story? Will you help me make sure people understand who these guards really are? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of people began recording their own videos, sharing their witness to the transformation they had seen. The elderly British woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward. "Young man," she said warmly, "you've shown more courage in admitting your mistake than most people show in their entire lives. That takes character." A middle-aged man with his family approached Jake. "My brother served in the military. Thank you for learning and for teaching us something important today." One by one, tourists began approaching Thomas as well, but their behavior was completely different from earlier. They asked respectfully if they could take photos. They thanked him for his service. They showed the kind of reverence that his sacrifice deserved. Colonel Hartley watched the scene unfold with deep satisfaction. He had seen too many good soldiers disrespected, too many sacrifices go unrecognized. Today, something had changed. Today, one person's ignorance had been transformed into understanding, and that understanding was spreading to everyone present. "Guardsman," the colonel said softly, "you handled yourself with perfect honor today." "Thank you, sir. It felt good to help someone understand." Jake approached them both one final time. "Colonel Guardsman Mitchell, I want you to know that this changed me. Not just how I act online, but how I see people. How I think about service and sacrifice." "Then something good came from today," Colonel Hartley replied. "And that's how we honor those who can't be here to see it." The three men stood together for a moment. An unlikely bond formed through confrontation, education, and redemption. Around the crowd continued to share videos, photos, and stories, but now they were telling a different narrative entirely. 3 months after that transformative day at Buckingham Palace, Jake Morrison sat in his apartment in Austin, Texas, staring at his computer screen. His social media following had exploded, but not in the way he had originally intended. The videos from that afternoon in London had been shared millions of times across every platform imaginable. The comments section told the story of his journey. Early responses to his original mockery had been harsh and unforgiving, calling him everything from cruel to heartless. But as people watched the full sequence of events, as they saw his genuine transformation and heartfelt apology, the tone had shifted dramatically. "This is what growth looks like," read one comment with thousands of likes. "Thank you for showing us how to admit when we're wrong and learn from it." Another highly shared comment came from a military veteran. "As someone who served, watching this young man learn respect the hard way gives me hope. We need more people willing to admit their mistakes and grow from them." Jake had kept his promise to Colonel Hartley and Guardsman Mitchell. Instead of deleting his original videos, he had created a comprehensive documentary showing the entire experience. He called it "The Day I Learned What Respect Means," and it had become one of the most watched educational videos about military service and sacrifice. His phone rang, interrupting his reflection. The caller ID showed an international number from London. "Hello, this is Jake. Mr. Morrison, this is Colonel Hartley. I hope you remember me." Jake nearly dropped his phone. "Colonel, of course I remember you. How are you? How is Guardsman Mitchell?" "We're both well, thank you. I'm calling because Thomas wanted me to reach out to you. He's been following your advocacy work online, and he wanted you to know how proud he is of what you've accomplished." Jake felt tears welling up in his eyes. Over the past 3 months, he had completely transformed his social media presence. Instead of creating content for shallow entertainment, he had become an advocate for veterans and military families. He had raised over $100,000 for military charities, organized care packages for deployed soldiers, and used his platform to educate people about the realities of military service. "I owe everything to both of you," Jake said. "That day changed my entire life." "Thomas also wanted me to tell you something else," the colonel continued. "He's been promoted. He's now training other guardsmen, and he tells every one of them the story of the American tourist who learned respect. He uses your transformation as an example of how education can triumph over ignorance. Jake wiped his eyes, overwhelmed by the generosity of these men who had turned his worst moment into a catalyst for positive change. Could you give me his contact information? I'd love to thank him personally. Actually, Colonel Hartley chuckled. That's the other reason I'm calling. Thomas is getting married next month to a wonderful young woman who's helped him through his recovery. He wondered if you might like to attend the wedding. The invitation hit Jake like a thunderbolt. These men, whom he had treated so poorly, were inviting him to share in one of the most important moments of Thomas's life. I would be honored, he managed to say. Excellent. I'll send you the details. And Jake, if I may call you that, Thomas, wanted me to tell you something else. He said that standing at his post that day, absorbing your mockery while dealing with his own pain, taught him something important about forgiveness and second chances. Your willingness to learn and change gave him hope that people could be better than their worst moments. After the call ended, Jake sat quietly for a long time. He thought about the person he had been that day in London, so focused on getting attention that he had lost sight of basic human decency. He thought about the person he had become, someone who used his platform to lift others up rather than tear them down. His phone buzzed with a text message from his manager. Jake, CNN wants to interview you for their Veterans Day special. They want to discuss how social media can be used responsibly to honor military service. Are you interested? Jake smiled as he typed his response. Absolutely. Let's talk about what real heroes look like. That evening, Jake recorded his daily video for his followers. His content had evolved from silly pranks and tourist antics to meaningful conversations about respect, service, and personal growth. Today I got a phone call that reminded me why I do what I do now, he told his camera. 3 months ago, I made a terrible mistake that taught me the most important lesson of my life. I learned that every person has a story. Every individual deserves respect, and our worst moments don't have to define us if we're willing to learn and grow. He paused, looking directly into the camera. If you're watching this and you've ever made fun of someone without knowing their story, if you've ever treated another person as entertainment rather than as a human being with feelings and experiences, I want you to know that it's never too late to change. It's never too late to choose respect over mockery, understanding over ignorance, compassion over cruelty. The video ended with Jake's new signature sign-off. Remember, everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. Choose kindness. As he uploaded the video, Jake thought about Guardsman Mitchell standing at his post, using discipline and duty to process his pain. He thought about Colonel Hartley, who could have simply walked away, but chose instead to educate and enlighten. And he thought about the thousands of service members around the world who deserved recognition, respect, and gratitude for their sacrifices. Jake Morrison had gone to London seeking viral fame through mockery and disrespect. Instead, he had found something far more valuable: purpose, humility, and the understanding that real strength comes not from tearing others down, but from building them up. The American tourist who had mocked a royal guard had become an advocate for the very people he had once ridiculed, proving that sometimes our greatest mistakes can become our most meaningful transformations.